What's going on, GBA fans? My name is Berk, and today we will be bringing you the Week 2 Power Rankings for the GBA Season 6. Now, of course, I am not alone. I am joined with my co-host, Trav.
Hey, everyone.
It's Week 2, so the rankings are going to change quite a bit, especially with a new coach coming in. So you're going to see some decent movement, but again, this is still early season. We'll continue to fine-tune the power rankings as the season goes on, and you won't see as many big changes. With that being said, at number 16, we both have the San Jose Sharpedos, and we agree a lot. Our lists are very similar this week, surprisingly. So, Tom is struggling still. He's not used to competing in the GBA, and I think he's trying to get used to competing again. If anything, I think Tom has a good attitude going in week to week. He knows he needs to change his play style. His play style doesn't fit his team, and he's not able to use it effectively. He needs to go the more offensive route because his team is very offensive, and he needs to use that and just kind of offense all over his opponents because that's what you want to do. And that's not what he did this week. What he does is he has dedicated walls, and I say that very lightly because Cobalion is not a dedicated wall. It's an offensive pivot or an offensive sweeper, not really a wall. He plays very passive with them too. He might get a little bit of chip damage here and there with like a volt switch or, a scald, but he's not really gaining any offensive momentum, and that's what we see this match. During planning, he knows he didn't really have switch-ins to Mega Man Electric. You know what's the best switch-in for Mega Man Electric? Something with an Assault Vest. He didn't have much for Azumarill. You can see that on his team. Well, you can deal with it offensively, and offensively check the Azumarill. All he did during this battle was give things free switch-ins, and then have to switch into a defensive check, and then try to take the damage, and then pivot out into another wall, because the only thing that would happen is Mono would switch into another offensive threat, make the good switch, and then he'd have to pivot into another wall to try to deal with it, and it doesn't deal with them. He didn't really have anything for Bronzong, and what he did deal with it was knockoff on Mamoswine. If you look at the Bronzong, and this goes for any wall, if you damage a wall and it does not get leftovers recovery and you don't see a Rocky Helmet, there's a almost 95% chance that that thing has a berry on it. Overall, he needs to start playing his team more offensively. That's his team structure, and he needs to move forward doing that.
That team matchup, Tom does a really good job of noting that, I have nothing for these huge offensive threats, but I think you need to start trying to find ways of dealing with them. You can bait things, you can prep for them a bit differently. You mentioned adding an AV to a mon, especially defensive Sylveon actually deals with Manectric decently well. It can't stop it gaining momentum, unfortunately, so it still has to take a Volt Switch and then he can go out into something which forces it out again. That's what Mega Manectric does really, really well. Especially defensive Cobalion is cool, but its special defense isn't really that great, and so it can't take hits particularly well. He let Mono get all the momentum early, but that was partly Mono playing really, really well, which we'll talk about later. One small thing in his commentary which got to me is he said that Mega Aerodactyl had been asleep for 4 turns. That can't happen. I'm not sure which gen they introduced it, but maximum sleep turns is 3. You just have to actually go for a move for it to count as a sleep turn. It didn't change the game at all. I mean, the sleep turns were unlucky. You stayed asleep forever, but counting them can be important for future weeks.
So moving on to number 15, we have the Milwaukee Sawbucks. Why don't you take the Milwaukee Sawbucks?
So the first thing that I think everyone is going to need us to address and that we're going to go over is the turn 1 crit on Slowbro. Yes, Slowbro would have lived, would have T-waved the Frostlass and then switched out, got Regenerator, been up a decent amount of health. But even with Regenerator, you would have still taken a shit ton of damage because it's a super effective stab Shadow Ball. Frostlass isn't the most offensive, but it wasn't especially defensive or even AV or anything, and even if that had happened, you would have taken way too much damage. It would have been useful as a pivot, but it wouldn't have been a wall unless you'd been able to repeatedly pivot to get Regenerator back. However, T-Wave might have worked. You said the plan was to T-Wave Frostlass and then go into Heatran. Guess what? Frostlass learns Destiny Bond. The most standard Frostlass set is with Destiny Bond. Yeah, that took out Heliolisk, which then meant that Steve was on the back foot early and didn't really have much for a lot of Tup's offense. After that, he played amazingly. The Sand Sweeper Sand Slash was a really, really good idea. Setting up a Sword Stance on Hippowdon worked perfectly. He managed to get off big hits, and predicted around Tuck really well, but unfortunately at that point he didn't have enough left to really capitalize on it. I did have one thing, at one point he whirlwinded out the extra drill with his goal bat, whereas I think it was a mostly physically defensive goal bat can actually sort of take on an extra drill. That would have brought extra drill down to the point where it could have got less hits off later, and would have left just Heatran and Pidgeot if he'd sacked the right things. And one-on-one, Heatran wins that matchup every time.
This was good planning this week. Last week, it wasn't great, but this week I think he's really improved in his planning. Turn 1 crit suck. Like, literally, I calced it. It was the max roll for a crit. So he got really, really fucking unlucky for that first turn. It's a very small chance that he would actually get O-code even with a crit, and he did. So, apparently, Battler X has the same luck as the predecessor, Steve, which is just weird. You know what I mean? Like, how do two different people have the same bad luck? After that, he got completely flustered and sacked off his Heliolisk, which I know it's hard to do. And I know people are going to say, well, you can't just say that he shouldn't get tilted. I know it's hard to stave off tilt after something like that happens. However, when something like a turn 1 crit happens, you have to take a step back and then look, well, what is my best play at this point? Instead of just saying, well, I'm going to go into this. You knew you wanted to go into Heatran. Frostlass just will try to hit Heatran, but nothing will happen. It seems that Battler X is really, really intent on running the franchise right into the ground. Up next, we have at 14, we have the Newcastle United at number 14. This week, I think Sam had a very similar problem to last week, and that is he's bringing these really passive walls that just don't really damage his opponent too much. I mean, he's bringing Klefki, which Klefki can be good, but I just feel like he's bringing it way too passive. This is a second week in a row he's brought, and I know it's only been 2 weeks, but this is the second week in a row he's bringing specially defensive Mew, or, defensive Mew with Roost and all that shenanigans. And he made assumptions about what sets Fizz was going to bring, and didn't think about anything else, like Life Orb, especially offensive Salamence, which is a really good set, Sam didn't even think about. He was caught completely off guard, and then had to sacked off something like his Klefki. He used the Suicune well, Rocks and Roar to try to whittle down Fizz's team because, he was making some good reads. He knew, the Volcanion would switch in on Suicune, and he could roar it out to make sure it continued to take rock damage. He spent way too much of the early game switching between his walls, and not actually getting an offensive presence on the board with something like Crobat, which was Choice Banded, which will do a crap ton of damage. And it was a really cool set too. Choice Banded with Giga Drain so that Rhyperior would die. He had the matchup at one point where he could have predicted the Rhyperior to come in and go for Giga Drain, but he just... I felt like he wasn't using the offense like offense and just wanted to continue to pivot between his walls. Tom was having a problem with not being able to put up offensive pressure. He needs to, yes, having walls and being able to switch between your walls to get a good defensive matchup is important, but it's also important to be able to pivot between your offensive options and get the superior offensive matchup. He did play well, but his loss of momentum in the early game led to an end game that he really wasn't going to win.
So yeah, main thing for Sam this match was just really, really passive for a lot of the early game. Even, pivoting with your walls is fine if you're getting the matchup that you want and dealing chip damage or getting status on things, whereas he was just sort of pivoting and just taking damage. Resto Chesto Suicune is a pretty decent set, but I think he needed to be a bit more careful after he lost the Chesto Berry when you went for rest, because it led to Sizzle being able to set up. You can scout, particularly something like a Salamence. It often runs mixed, especially when you have a Klefki. Basically, if you're bringing Klefki, you have to expect that people won't go for ground coverage because you can run Magnet Rise. So expect them to bring something different. Both weeks we've seen Smackdown. You have to scout out sets for your Klefki because you know that people are going to bring coverage for it because it's an annoying, dangling key piece of shit.
At number 13, we both have the New York Metapods. And Dan improved this week. A lot. From last week where his planning was bad and his playing was pretty bad. His planning, though, was still a little weak to me. What reliably switches on Medicham? Wobbuffet. Put Toxic on the Medicham so it doesn't just get tracked like it did. If you look at everything on Dan's team, everything could deal with Wobbuffet. everything except for the one thing that Wobbuffet was supposed to switch in on. Got played right in the beginning, lost his only way to set up webs immediately. Like, there was no reason for him not to click sticky web, because yes, he could have been taunted, but he knew he needed the sticky webs up, and he knew he needed to get them up immediately. Go for it. If there's a taunt, you switch it out, you find another way to bring it back in. He had a lot of pivoting on his team, so he could have pivoted back into the Galvantula. This game, Dan tried to make aggressive doubles like he normally does. They just weren't working out for him. He tried to get his Medi not trapped, didn't really work out in the end. I mean, he made a good double in the beginning to make sure it didn't get trapped, but then some of his plays I just didn't really understand. He's trying to make a really aggressive plays. He let his Rotom take so much damage. I know it was a crit, but he let it take so much damage from that Earthquake. Like, there was no reason to Volt Switch out. He's trying to make these aggressive reads, like when he switches in his Altaria on the Haxorus, expects him to switch, goes for the Fire Blast, and instead takes Poison Jab to the face. When there's a big threat like that on the field, you have to go face. You have to just hit it and kill it. You can't mess around with it, because all that's going to happen is your team's going to get whittled down a lot. He was just losing a lot of momentum throughout that game. He was not able to get a real foothold in this match until he started bringing in Victini and trying to get off big hits, although at that point it was a little bit too late in this match. It just kind of got away from him. The one thing I will say that I did like, he didn't let the Gorbis set up and Smash Pass, because if at any point that thing had Smash Pass, I think that would have been pretty much game.
I know Dan is a very aggressive player. That's how he's had success previously. But I think he needs to have a bit of a look at that playstyle and see if he can make some more middle ground plays. A lot of the time, he took a big risk with a very important Mon, and it cost him. The last couple of turns, I see no reason why you wouldn't calc Air Slash against Altaria, because if it could have taken one but not two, then you wouldn't have to risk a speed tie, stuff like that. The hacks didn't really matter in the end. Flinches are going to happen, and there is nothing anyone can do about it.
Gotta bring Inner Focus and, what was it, Lucky Chant? Something like that? I don't know.
Lucky Chant. For once, Inner Focus Mega Gallade is actually going to be useful, except because it can totally take an Air Slash anyway.
At number 12, and this is probably one of the biggest drops, we have Utah Jasmine. This week, Cooper, how do I say this? Cooper got destroyed this week. His planning just was not there this week. He did not have anything for Cress, and I know he said he had stuff for Calm Mind Cress, but that's not the only set that can be run. And he just didn't have anything for Cress in general. It just kind of walled everything. Nothing hit it hard enough, because nothing ever does hit Cress hard enough. You saw Cooper didn't have switch-ins for Entei. You saw Cooper didn't have switch-ins for Manaphy. He just didn't have switch-ins, and he didn't have ways to take down Geo's walls this week. And if you don't have switch-ins for offensive threats, and you have no ways to take down walls on your side, then that generally leads to a losing strategy. He tried to take advantage of the rain that he knew Geo was going to bring with Thunder on Magnezone, so, that's good, but I don't really understand the triple electric coverage. Hypnosis on Gallade, it can work, it just has to hit. If that's your strategy to deal with Cresselia, is to put it to sleep through a move that has 60% accuracy, that's not a good strategy to deal with Cresselia. This match, he played both safely and unsafely with the Gliscor by first making sure that it doesn't take big damage from an Ice Beam from the Nidoking, and then switching it in on the Manaphy to set up rocks. He made good predictions with the Magnezone. He was able to read the switches. However, Magnezone, although Geo didn't have good switch-ins to it, was not able to really get a foothold in this match. I know Cooper does not like Unaware Clefable. However, your opponent has a Manaphy. Unaware Clefable may not be able to fully deal with Manaphy. It is at least a switch-in, because it won't just get blown back by the Tail Glow set like we saw this week. He tried to bring it back by setting up with the Gallade, but your opponent has a Cresselia. And I know you had Hypnosis just for that, but had the Hypnosis hit, I don't think there was a way for him to get back into this battle. It was too late.
I didn't really understand a lot of what Cooper was trying to do this week. Some of the sets were interesting and cool and dealt with something well, but they got completely shut down in other circumstances. He got a lot of his Magnezone predictions right. I've never seen someone use Magnezone that well. Just very weird plays during the match, like doubling into Gliscor. He says in his commentary expecting the Manaphy to come in, which I don't see any reason why you would want Gliscor in on a Manaphy. I know he wanted to get rocks up, but there would have been other opportunities to do that, and I think the mindset was almost too much on the late game and not enough on dealing with the threat that was in front of him, which is the opposite of what you say for a lot of people. Yeah, he just had absolutely nothing for Entei. His draft in general has absolutely nothing for Entei. I would like to see something maybe to try and deal with it, like a scarfed Gliscor or something just out of the blue that he thinks, Gio thinks he can come in and click Sacred Fire and get off a huge hit, and then you catch him off guard.
No, he had a resistance. It was Greninja.
Yeah, physically defensive Greninja. Why didn't we see physically defensive Resto Chesto Greninja?
Because
it's terrible, that's why.
That would have been hilarious to see, though.
Oh, it would have been fantastic, it just wouldn't have worked.
So number 11, I have the Barusia Donfans, and you have them at number 9, so why don't you take over?
He basically crit for Alligator to win the game. I'm not 100% sure of calcs because Nick said that he was guaranteed to live, and Lars said that there was like a 12% chance, I think, for him to take it out anyway. And they did talk about sets afterwards, so I'm not exactly sure. Either way, that's not a particularly convincing way to win, so I kind of just left Lars where he was. He also had every single mon was specially offensive. He didn't have a single physical coverage move on his team against a team that can bring, especially defensive, annoying sub-roost Kyurem or especially defensive Mega Venusaur. I don't generally agree with bringing all of your offense on one side. With his playing quite a few times, he didn't consider every possibility of what Nick could go for. He was just thinking of the most likely one in his mind and played for that. And sometimes you need to go, well, if he makes this other player, if he has this other set, will that completely lose me the game from this point?
Lars had all special attackers, like, Jesus Christ. At some point in the long line, you're gonna say, look, special attacker, special attack, let's get a physical attack. And no, he was thinking about running a physical attack, and it was SmackDown. So it seems everyone and their mother is thinking about running SmackDown, since John ran it last week, so...
Hey, I ran SmackDown Darmanitan two seasons ago for Road and Wash.
Yeah, but no one cares about that.
No one cares about me. I mean, what?
Early game, he's roaring around a lot of things with no rocks up. If you plan on phasing, then you're going to have to get hazards up before you start really trying to phase around, and he didn't have that. He did get rocks up, but I feel like he should have prioritized getting rocks up sooner than later, and then trying to phase around the team, because at least he would have gotten a lot of chip damage off on things like Kyurem Black if it was forced in. He whittled down Nick's team well with the Mega Zam. I mean, he used it well. He didn't see the Agility Gator coming. He's constantly expecting Dragon Dance. Dragon Dance Gator, Dragon Dance Gator, Dragon Dance Gator. What do you do for Agility Gator? And he really didn't have much. So what do you do when Fraligator sets up an Agility? You crit it, and you win. So just like your reasoning of not moving him anywhere, I didn't move him anywhere either. So anyway, moving on to number 10, we both have the Real Marill. And this week, it's a definite improvement over last week. A definite improvement in the planning over last week, because, yeah, last week. However, you constantly said Diancie was not coming. Diancie doesn't have a good matchup. It's not coming. A good player like Chimp would not bring Diancie. And then there's Diancie. I don't know why you thought Diancie's had such a poor matchup against your team. You've got pretty much one switch in Registeel, and that's it. Yeah, you can offensively check it with something like Blastoise, but Blastoise doesn't switch in on 2 Moonblasts. Blastoise doesn't switch in on 2 Diamond Storms. I mean, that thing hits hard AF. And this week, hey, Registeel wasn't complete setup fodder. So what I thought was funny is, first turn, he lets it take an Earthquake, and he's like, oh, Registeel's important, I probably shouldn't let this happen. And then he was talking about how Blastoise was this super, super important, and then he lets it take an Explosion to the face. Granted, you don't really expect Explosion from Metagross the first turn it's out, so... And he absolutely needs to check things like PP on his Blastoise, because if you have a move that doesn't have a lot of uses, and then you don't increase the amount of uses, like, he could have run out of Hydro Pumps. He got lucky with the roll on the Coaberry Scully. It meant the Talonflame lives another day. And then there's the Crit Para on Diancie, and it just... Miguel had a lucky day. Had the hacks not happened, would have Chimp won? This is the thing. A lot of people theory mon and say, well, Chimp would have won. I don't know. Chimp might have still lost. Like, this is the thing with hacks. You don't know who's going to win had the hacks not happened. Plays would have been different. He actually knew to preserve his Registeel until the end. He knew that that was going to be the thing that wins him the game, and it was the thing that won him the game. So he thought more of the late game. He planned much better, and if he continues to do this, he will move up. But this was a rather unconvincing win due to how much hacks he got against Chimp. That's not to say he would have lost if the hacks not happened.
The main thing with his entire team, in particular, it was demonstrated this week, is you have switch-ins to things, but you can't let them take too many hits because they have no reliable recovery. And I'm probably going to bring this up pretty much every week. With checking PP on Hydro Pump, I would have thought Miguel, of all people, would have learned by now to check what your Jenners give you. He had the Wafflegate initially, which was something different, and then against Shady last season, where some idiot, not naming names, it was me, forgot to put speed IVs on Greninja. I think it's a really important thing when you have a league team is just to go through, it doesn't take particularly long, just go through every mon and check the ability, moves, stats. One last thing is that he did preserve the Registeel really well, even if Kingdra had Specs Hydro Pump, Registeel had just enough health, and I calced it, to live a Specs Hydro in the rain for a modest Kingdra, so he did that well.
So, at my number 9 and your number 8, we have the Philadelphia Scissors. His opponent, so why don't you take the Philadelphia Scissors?
First thing I wanted just to say about Chimpact is I'm watching his team builder, and I see Explosion Diancie, and I'm like, oh cool, Suicide Lead Diancie, that's fun. And then I see Explosion Metagross, and just, I love Explosion as a move, and it's really cool to see actually get some use.
Double explosion power.
Just boom on everything, just send them in and just blow up. And it worked. Metagross Explosion in particular put a huge dent in Blastoise, which Miguel wasn't expecting, meant it was basically useless for the rest of the game, and that was really, really good. The Scolipede set was it was literally so close to being perfect. The high roll basically meant it didn't work. That would have taken out Talonflame, which would have completely shifted the momentum of the game. Talonflame was a huge win condition, and having Scolipede still around at +1 speed, able to fire off one last hit before it dies, and Talonflame dead would have been huge. And the main thing I would say on that is don't try and run calcs to get guaranteed Okos on mons with max HP. It's a bit of a difficult thing in League format is you go, do I run this little bit more attack investment and get a guaranteed Oko, or do I try and optimize my defense investment so that I am guaranteed to take a hit even after I've been whittled and stuff like that. It's a bit of a 50-50. I tend to just go with not trying to guarantee Okos and assuming that something else will be able to get that little bit of chip damage you need.
Well, just on that, he didn't need to guarantee an Oko on Talonflame, because what's the move that Talonflame's going to go against the Scolipede? Brave Bird.
He did mention in his team builder he was afraid of acrobatics. He didn't really think about Scarf Gothitelle. He mentioned he didn't expect Gothitelle at all. And this is something a bit with Chimp's team building the first 2 weeks, is he's said, I'm expecting these 6 mons, and has prepped really well for those, and then put a little bit of prep into the other mons, and generally not enough, in my opinion. It meant that Chimp's Taunt got really weakened when it could have been used to have a bit more HP, could have stacked it to Talonflame to have other mons to deal with Registeel. This week demonstrated why I had Chimp's draft low in the post-draft power rankings. It really does struggle with a lot of different offensive threats. In this case it was Talonflame, but there's quite a few things which can actually put a big dent in his team. Other than that, I think Chimp actually played really well. I really like how he's prepping. I liked the idea of Cova Berry and stuff like that, and that is exactly what some of the coaches I've ranked lower need to be doing, is going, I have nothing for this particular mon on my draft, what's some way I can make sure that I get rid of it early?
Yeah, this battle definitely showed me why I don't like this draft. He just doesn't have enough solid checks to offensive threats on his opponent's team. You can't have a perfect check to everything that your opponent can have, or that everyone has in the entire league. But he just doesn't have any checks to a lot of offensive threats, and that just really, I think this battle really showed. He didn't have his switch in for Zebstrika, which, if your team gets run through by even the most PU of electric types, that's a problem. So you pretty much said everything. The only other thing I wanted to say was, he did say he was tilted this match after the crit para. And again, like I said, for Battler X, you have to try to stave off the tilt for matches. I get it. It's an easy thing to get tilted, and it's a very hard thing to untilt yourself, because I know for myself, it's very hard. If I'm tilted, I'm tilted. And it's going to be hard to get back into that match. But it's something that there's a lot of hacks in Pokemon, and you have to work through that and realize that, okay, yes, this happened. What is still my next best play? So at number 8, I have the Tampa Bay Lux Rays. You have them at number 11. Now, Mono, I'm actually kind of surprised he won. He's playing as a Cobalion, which meant that not only was he fighting Tom, he was fighting PTSD. That's two things that are really hard to combat, and somehow he managed to win, too. So I moved him up a lot, and I know he's 1-1. However, I do not count the first loss against him because he did not earn that loss. He didn't play that match. So I'm looking at him from a clean slate from one win. And he played very well, so I moved him up a lot. He has passive walls on his team, but he knows how to make them unpassive. Like, he can put coverage on them to make sure that something just can't set up on them. He can't just not touch anything. He can at least use that to pivot into his more offensive threats. And he used that a lot to gain himself a lot of momentum through this match. And I think Mono, you can hear it from his commentary. He thinks through all of his plays every single time. Like, he knows exactly what he needs to do. He knows exactly what to do. Like, when he's talking about switching in the Mandibuzz in the Starmie. He knew he didn't need Mandibuzz. He knew he could switch it in on a water move. That's fine. He was going to sack it off anyway to see if it was Scarfed if he decided to go for Psychic. It's that kind of thinking that really impresses me, and that makes me think he's going to do really well if he can think through all his moves that clearly. And I think it's not so much the planning that had me super impressed. He just played this match, I think, extremely well. He was able to lure in big threats like the Mamoswine. If he can play this well every single week, I think he's going to do very well coming into the future weeks.
Mono is trash.
And that too.
Until he beats me in league format, I can't move him up much higher.
True.
So, honestly though, looking at this game, he was pretty much completely in control from the get-go. And this is going to sound weird because I have him ranked at 11, a lot of other people ranked higher. But essentially, everyone I had from 11 to 6 are kind of all just equal. And there was very slight differences that made any change, but it was kind of... it was very difficult to sort out the coaches in this chunk this week. Mono played really, really well. The prep was pretty much how you expect league format prep to be, and I really think a couple of the other coaches should, if they haven't, go look at his game and see how you can use a bulky pivot effectively. He had some really passive walls and used them so well, and I feel like Sam, who we talked about, and Miguel could both actually learn a bit from watching how Mono plays with his walls. He consistently made good doubles in middle ground plays, and you mentioned the one with the Starmie, and there are a couple of others. The main reason I have him a bit lower than everyone else is because it's still not the team that he drafted. He made one change, but it's still not what he would have come up with. And he says he's getting more comfortable with it, but I think it's going to potentially come up as an issue later on in the season.
At number 7, we have the Atlanta Halluchas. So why don't you talk about Fizz?
Fizz was Fizz this week, as opposed to last week where he was, I'm not quite sure what. He played
Fizz.
Much more like I expected to see him play. He scouted thoroughly for sets, and I liked the stubborn defogging, even though he knew he lost the PP war, and relying on the fact that Sam would be more impatient than him. Using Mashana to synchronize back Mew is also showing that he knows what his team can and can't do, and that's a really smart play. And one of the big things I liked about this week is Volcanion, which we've never seen before in any league, or at least I haven't, is showing what it can do. It walled Suicune to no end, and just fired off massive hits. It wasn't the thing that won him the game completely, but it did show that it can fire off some huge hits, and it's not something you can sleep on. I really, really liked both the Salamence and Electivire sets. They were both perfect for what he needed this match, and really put a lot of pressure on Sam early, forced switches. So we were saying before that Sam switched between his walls a lot, but Fizz also played to that, so he made the predictions and made the switches to force Sam to go into his walls rather than get any offensive momentum. And I really think that Fizz showed why he was one of the better coaches last season and has consistently been good in the format, because he can make the good play most of the time and occasionally chuck in a really, really balls to the wall prediction like going for Flamethrower and a Suicune and have it pay off.
There's a few things. First, Fizz, check the HP on your mons. He did the exact opposite of what Sam was doing. Sam pivoted between walls, Fizz pivoted between his wall breakers. that's a little bit different. If you're pivoting between your wall breakers, chances are you're going to break shit. And he broke things. Very aggressive playing by Fizz, just worked out so well. I don't really have anything else to add. At number 6, we both have the Pittsburgh Paratitas. I don't really care how you pronounce it, Tup. I'll pronounce it any way I want to. I thought this was not how I think Tup normally plans, and it did not pay off for him at all this week. Like, he's running dual weather. Tup plans on bringing this kind of sun sweeper, Tangrowth, which I know I'm also going to get hate on because I said Tangrowth really is going to be pretty one-dimensional for his team. Leave it in the comment section. I know you're all going to hate me. I didn't see the point of that set. You know what would have done good for his team? A physically defensive Tangrowth that can take an X-Scissor from Sandslash. Because he knew, like he even said in planning, that, you know, Steve can bring a Sandrush Sandslash. He can. And then Tup proceeds to bring nothing to deal with it well. Like, he's got Hippowdon. Hippowdon can't just OHKO it back, whereas a physically defensive Tangrowth can take the hit and then Leaf Storm and just blow back Sandslash very easily. Like, the planning I thought was very weak. He got this early game hacks, but the thing is he took advantage of it. And if you're going to get the hacks, at least make sure you take advantage of it. And then he was able to, with just Frostlass, take down both Heliolisk and Slowbro. When the Sandslash was in, Tup, you said that you were worried about Sandslash setting up in your face. And then what you proceed to do is let Sandslash set up in your face. Like, there was no reason to switch out the Hippowdon. It was, you stay in, you damage the Sandslash, because at that point, you don't need Hippowdon anymore. Make sure the Sandslash doesn't run through your team and kill off things like the Tangrowth. Once the Sandslash went down, though, I think Tup, he gained control back for the match and then just cleaned up with X-Control, because that's what Driller does. Just cleans up things that are low on health. Aside from playing around the Sandslash, I think Tup played well. I don't think he planned as well. If he planned for a sweeper, Sandrush, Life Orb, SD, Sandslash, then I don't think he would have to make risky plays like switching out on the Sandslash in case it sets up.
Tup is the lowest ranked of the teams that are 2-0 right now. And the main reason for that is the fact that he's played the two coaches who we have ranked lowest in these. And with this win in particular, he wasn't actually that convincing. He managed to pull off the win, and it wasn't that hacks decided it or anything, but it definitely could have swung the other way with a couple of different plays, and it was a lot closer than the score made it look, and the score made it look pretty close. The Sun team was cool, but I don't think this was the best week to bring it. Definitely, I like to encourage the creativity. Sunsweeper Tangrowth can do things in particular matchups, but generally you want it to be a team where your 3 moves just OHKO everything, and you set up the Sun when your opponent's not expecting it. And I don't think this was the best week to try and bring it. He played around some of Battler X's threats well once the Sand went down, managed to pivot around things, get favourable matchups reasonably well, and obviously the first 2 turns, even though we're talking about Steve making huge misplays, he still made the correct play with things like Destiny Bonding with the Frostlass rather than trying to get off more chip damage on the Heliolisk and things like that. The turn 1 crit definitely helped him out because Slowbro would have been an annoyance, but, you know, it's Pokemon, these things happen.
So at number 5, we have the Boston Red Sox. So you can take Nick.
Mega Venusaur didn't really seem to do much this match. I think that might have been more the set that he brought rather than having a particularly bad matchup, but pretty much everything on Lars's team has some form of coverage for it, and it wasn't particularly helpful. The Kyurem set was really, really good. I think a bulky variant of Kyurem really helped him out this match and put on a lot of pressure. I'm not really sure why Nick he said in his commentary that he just had a complete mental blank, and it happens, but he didn't expect sub-Mega Alakazam, and that's probably one of the most common moves that it runs, because towards the end, when he went for Giga Drain on the Landorus, he did mention in his commentary that Sleep Powder was the better play because Feraligatr could have OHKO'd it anyway, but it wouldn't have mattered if it hadn't been for that crit, so he could have potentially saved the game anyway if he'd gone for Sleep Powder, but it's a bit of a muchness in that sense. He did play really well throughout the game. taking out the threats that he saw on Lars's side. And I think his prep was actually really, really good on everything pretty much except the Venusaur. I think slightly different set could have been brought to deal with Lars's team a bit better. But the prep on everything else was actually really, really good. And one of the things that I really liked about Nick's playing this week was bluffing the Scarf with Kyurem. I genuinely thought that Kyurem was Scarf until he mentioned the fact that it had Substitute, which is ridiculous. He kept repeatedly going for the same move, not making predictions, until he knew he could get off a sub for free, and then used it to put a lot of pressure on Lars's team. And I like the fact that Nick is able to do this consistently, because he did it last week with the HP Fire on Venusaur.
Yeah, so for me, just like I couldn't move Lars up for winning, I couldn't really move Nick down for losing, because he lost to a crit. Like, he played really well, he brought some really interesting sets. The AV, Specially Defensive Drapion, was really good for Zam. He played well around the Roar Vaporeon. One thing is, he kept saying how he thought the Mesprit was AV. You saw it set up rocks. You gotta make sure you can't get thrown off by things like that, especially thinking it has an item that it doesn't, because if you think it's AV, even though you see it set up rocks, then you might be less inclined to hit it with a special attack. And then, even though that would have been the best play if it wasn't AV. So, anyway, moving on to number 4, we have the New Orleans Pelipers, and this was a match.
Best game of the week.
Yes.
Putting it out there.
And we'll get to George soon, but John had his own things that I just looked at. I was just like, what are you doing? He had Endeavor Reuniclus with Regenerator. This shouldn't be a thing. It shouldn't have worked, but it worked so damn well. He scouted for the Scarf from the Gardevoir. He recognized that was going to be win condition for George. It's good that he can recognize what his opponent is going to recognize as their win conditions. Lots of early game predictions, a little bit over predictions. He could have gotten rocks up first turn, but he allows the Mega Beedrill to set the T-Spikes, and that's no good. And the hope that Gastro would live a Grass Knot from a Life Orb max special attack. Infernape, that's modest. That's a very hopeful thought, but that's not going to work. And if you know that, like, Infernape is going to bring Grass Knot to deal with Gastrodon, like, that's something that you can run Rindo Berry Miracote, and then just there goes Infernape. If you know Melodic is going to be such a big problem, and it is, Melodic is really good, and it's really hard to take down, why not bring something that deals with Melodic well, like Rotom Cut? You know, the thing that has dual stab that hits Melodic super effectively? John just wasn't ahead of the game, especially when it came to aggressive switches, which George was making at the end game. And it just kind of got out of his hands once the Infernape switched in as he switched out. So he didn't make any misplays, and I think he planned extremely well. That's why I only moved him down a little bit, because he played really well, and this match was fantastic.
One thing that I think it probably didn't matter, but it might have actually won him the game, is not revealing Quick Attack on Lopunny, because everyone expects Fake Out, but they don't necessarily expect Quick Attack. My point with this is, information is everything. If you knew your opponent's exact sets, it would be so much easier to beat them, because all those things they bring to throw you off guard just won't work. And so that means you're spending the whole game trying to scout out your opponent's sets. But on the other side, that means if you don't have to, don't reveal particular moves. And in that case, Fake Out and Quick Attack both would have worked, it was the first turn, etc. He used Knockoff really well. One thing I really liked about his commentary, actually, was he said he noted the particular mons that had items they needed to get rid of, and then pivoted into his Escavalier to knock off those items. The way he played it was really, really good.
So, at my number 3 and your number 2, we have the San Diego Chimchargers. Why don't you take them?
I thought the Chimichangas used Wobbuffet well. I was honestly surprised. His prep was just amazing, honestly, this game. The EV spreads were perfect for what they needed to be. He managed to predict Dan's team really well with things like Speed Creeping and Adamant Mega Altaria with his Togekiss, and of course that's exactly what Dan brings. It might throw him off a little bit when people don't bring exactly what he expects, but if he continues to get those predictions right, then it's going to be really hard for people to beat him. Envy was also just really consistent. Every play he made was the best possible play. I can't think of a single example where he did the wrong thing. My one criticism of his prep is trying to Smash Pass. It's going to be difficult to pull off against any team, because people see Gorobus, they're going to either have something built into their team to try and deal with Smash Pass, or figure out a way to play around it on the fly because you know what's going to happen. The thing I really liked about it, though, was when he shell smashes up and burns off the White Herb, and then switches straight out into Wobbuffet because he knew he couldn't sweep at that point because of the Metacham, and was able to use Wobbuffet to get rid of Metacham. I would have liked it if he'd baton passed into Wobbuffet, just because I enjoy the notion of Wobbuffet having completely pointless +2 boosts in a couple of stats, but whatever.
He needs that +2 special attack Mirror Coat.
Yeah, that's how Pokemon works.
So Envy, I think, played as Envy did like last week. He played well, and he took Dan to town. The team building, again, really solid. As you said, Smash Pass isn't going to work. I'm sorry. Like, I know I'm being really negative on Smash Pass, but it's one of the things most planned for. Like, he predicted Dan throughout this entire thing. He knew what Dan was going to do, especially, like, in the beginning when he opened up with the Sneasel. He's like, well, Dan is not going to set the webs because he's going to be expecting the taunt, so he's going to go for the attacking move, and I can take it out immediately. I can go for the knockoff, and then I can Pursuit Trap it so it never gets at the webs this game. He used Hacksters very well, just cripple so many things. It was just... And able to actually get a kill with Wobbuffet, which I honestly did not think was going to get any kills this season, so I was proven wrong there. And he just held the momentum well throughout the battle. I mean, he never let it up. He never let it up. He was working off of Dan over-predicting around Envy, and then just able to get off big damage on a ton of things. Because like with the Altaria, he was like, I'm going to sack off my Haxorus anyway. Like, I don't need it at this point, but I can get off huge damage against the Altaria if he chooses to actually, you know, stay in and attack. And instead of Dan staying and going for the Hyper Voice and actually taking out the Haxorus, he went for the Fire Blast and took gigantic damage. But he didn't really have to play very aggressively this battle. Like, there was no real aggressive switches to really get ahead in this battle. He just kept making the middle ground plays. At number 2, I have the San Francisco Arcaniners, and you have them at number 3. And I want to mention something. 2 and 3 for me were just completely interchangeable. George, I was watching your team builder, and as I was watching your team builder, I was just getting like progressively angrier as I was watching it. Because first, I'm like, Toxic Spikes Mega Beedrill. George, what are you doing? And then Trick Scarf, Trick Room Gardevoir. And I'm just like, George, what are you doing? And then he's Reflect type Rocky Helmet Latias. And I'm just, George, what the hell are you doing? And just how? Why? Who thinks of this stuff? Like, who goes into planning and says, you know what might work? Physically defensive Rocky Helmet Reflect type Latias. I'm just like, where did this come from? George's planning, I'm lost for words. And it worked. That's the thing that I'm so confused about, is the stuff worked. How does physically defensive Rocky Helmet Latias with Reflect type work? But it did. And George, I think George played this game like George does normally. George is a great battler. He knows what he needs for his late game. Like, when he saw the team matchup, he immediately identified Gardevoir as his win condition and made sure that that stayed healthy. The one thing George absolutely needs to fix, and this is probably my biggest complaint, and if this is my biggest complaint, then he did things right, is the Beedrill had even HP EVs. And now, it was bad for the Electivire, but it's even worse for something that's actually weak to rocks. You absolutely need to fix that for next week. I do not want to see an even number of HP EVs. You need to check that. I like how he used Rest to activate Marvel Scale, to deal with low punny. I think it would have been better to have Rocky Helmet on the Melodic, if that's your way to deal with low punny. But with the Toxic Spikes up, it's like, he made sure to bring in Ape at every turn. It dealt fucking huge damage to everything because it's an Infernape and it was Life Orb max special attack and modest. Allowing the Rocky Helmet to get knocked off, that was very short-sighted in the battle. He realized as soon as it got knocked off, it's like, oh, that was bad. I shouldn't have let it get knocked off. They were really neck and neck this whole battle. Yeah, he did get some lucky, especially luck with the roll and the miss. Granted, he did get crit the turn before, so it's like, it kind of worked out. Really what happened was that aggressive double switch at the end. Bringing back Infernape, putting the momentum squarely in George's favor, making sure that he was going to win that match at the end.
I literally watched George's team builder and just burst out laughing partway through. But basically, when he goes to his Gardevoir set, and I see that it has Trick and Trick Room, I started laughing, and I listened to his reasoning, and he made sense, and that scares me. Because no one should put a Choice Scarf on a Mon, and then think, I should run Trick Room on this. George does, but, like, I can see the reasoning behind it, and that's the insane thing, is that George comes up with really good gimmicks. and I haven't seen anyone else do it better. One gimmick that sort of failed was Magnet Rise Magneton because he didn't have HP Fire as well. One thing is with his speed creeping, he was predicting John's speed creeps, which is really, really risky because you never know when they try and creep something different to what you're expecting. John mentioned that George really likes to bring T-Spikes, and if he'd seen Nidoqueen on the opposing side, I think he almost would have expected it, but because George now has 2 Toxic Spike setters, and he can bring either of them, it's going to throw an extra dimension into mind games with a bunch of the rest of the coaches. The Infernape set was pretty much the only one that wasn't a gimmick in some sense this week, and it was perfect. It just blew holes through John's team, and there's not really much you could have done about that. George did play really, really well. The aggressive double just completely set up the game for him. He got a bit unlucky with the Sleep Talk rolls, but then there was also the roll with the Play Rough, and just the hacks wasn't game-changing this match.
At number 1 on both of our lists, we have the San Francisco Giants, and Gio's a man after my own heart. He put a shit emoji instead of Claydol, and that just made me happy. And I'm gonna say this now, this had nothing to do with his ranking at 1, and I shouldn't have to, but I feel the need to say this. Gio, please, you need to clarify something for me, and do this in the comment sections. I need to understand. I don't understand, but I need to understand. Why did you have Rain Dance on Entei? I know you probably weren't going to click it, and I know you said you had scenarios in your head where it's going to work, but why? I'm just genuinely curious why he had Rain Dance on it. Gio went in with a great game plan. Keep his walls healthy. Like, he was preserving his walls to make sure that they could wall the things that they were meant to wall. Cresselia wasn't going to switch in until the Mega Glaive came in. And, like, Regirock was preserved specifically for the Staraptor. He wanted to play an aggressive early game and keep his walls healthy so that when Cooper tried to fight back, he still had his walls. Something that I saw during the game, which I don't see many other coaches doing, is Gio was doing his calcs, and that's awesome, and I want to see more coaches doing that because you need to do your calcs. You need to see how much damage can your opponent do to you. And he expected Bright Powder on everything, and normally I would say you're being paranoid, but this is Cooper we're talking about. He didn't play, like, super exceptionally well. Like, there wasn't any plays I was like, oh my god, he made this great aggressive, but he didn't need to. He had the right plan going in, and his opponent had nothing for Entei. He just had to preserve Entei until things were whittled down enough where he could bring it in an E-speed, everything to death. He did get the Hypnosis misses, but I don't think that really mattered. It might have mattered in terms of differential, but Gio was ahead in this game from basically turn 1 and stayed with that momentum throughout the entire match, never let it go, even when he had his walls in. Overall, it was pretty flawless play. Some hacks increased the differential, but I don't think the Hypnosis hit. It would have turned the tide of the battle. It was just, Gio was in control, and he stayed in control, and so he's at number 1.
When Gio was running calcs, the important thing that I noted is he isn't just running a calc and saying, can this thing kill me at this point? He was running calcs to actually scout the opponent's moveset. You've pretty much covered everything. I did like the fact that Gio basically took notice of every single thing that happened in the battle, whereas he criticized some other coaches for missing a specific thing, like Nick with Stealth Rock on Mesprit, and Gio, every time there was one little thing that was a giveaway to a particular item or whatever, like not seeing lefties or Life Orb recoil or anything, he took note of it in his commentary, which is really good. He predicted Cooper's team really, really well. He pretty much knew what he was going to be bringing. The Entei set was super standard apart from Rain Dance, which he did end up clicking anyway, and it worked really, really well, which I liked because a lot of times people try and get too specific with sets, and sometimes it's good to just bring something which has no flair on it whatsoever, but you know it's going to work because there is absolutely nothing your opponent can do to stop it. I didn't really see a single mistake in team building or in playing, which is why he's number 1 for me. There wasn't anything this week that I think he could have done better. Basically, DDG is stupid. I hate Crest so much.
So that is going to wrap up the Week 2 Power Rankings for the GBA Season 6. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have your own Power Rankings, please leave them down in the comment section below. We'd love to hear your opinions on who you think is doing the best this season. That is all we've got for this week, so hope you all enjoyed listening, and we will see you all next week.
Bye.